kingdom or domain. Protists, we might have to put it in quotation marks. It's really more kind of a leftover group, a collection of kingdoms, if you will, but it's kind of inconvenient to think about all these different kingdoms. So these are really the leftovers. What I would say in general about them is that they are eukaryotes that are mostly single-celled and live in water. But that's really overgeneralization. Now, you may think that protists don't play much of a role in your life, and compared to most of the other ones, they probably don't. But they're more common than you might think. Let's take a look at some of the major groups of protists. First, where do we find protists? Pretty much anywhere there's moisture. They're really common in water. So in the ocean, streams, lakes, places like that. But even moist soil, snow, or inside of bodies, you'll find protists. Let's take a look at a few examples.
Protists, if you remember, are right here in the domain Eukarya, although we might, instead of thinking of them as their own box, think of them better on this tree of life. And so this brown branch that I'm squiggling on here, all that is the Eukarya domain, which ends in plants, animals, and fungi. And all these other little side branches, the flagellates and microsporidia and so on, those are the protists. So they're kind of the simple Eukarya organisms that lead up to the more complex ones, but they really represent many groups. All right, well, with that overview, let's just look at a few of the different types of protists, starting with protozoans. Sounds really similar, but you probably hear this term, protozoans, different than protists, but the zoa or zoo refers to animal-like. So there's a whole bunch of them that are animal-like. They go around, swimming around in water, gobbling up things that are smaller than them, whether living or dead. Some of them, like this little Paramecium over here with all those green dots in it, actually form a symbiotic relationship with algae. It captures them and holds them inside of itself, kind of like the bacteria we have living in our intestines. So they can actually be surprisingly complex, but usually single-celled. Then there's a whole range of things that we call algae. A lot of them are green, like the two over here on the left side. Some large enough to see, others like this Volvox down here, looks like a little disco ball, is more microscopic. They have flagella. That thing spins around like a crazy disco ball. If you ever get a chance to see one under the microscope, take it. But then they have other pigments as well. These are all photosynthetic. So you got kelp up here, which is a type of brown algae, so it doesn't look very green at all. You have red algae, lots of those in the ocean, and even in the snow. There's this little red patch here in the snow you can see that is a bunch of red algae. And the red and the brown algae in particular have a couple of substances, alginic acid and carrageenan, that you will often see in a variety of products. If you read food labels, you'll see it all the time in ice creams and a lot of other dairy products because it thickens it. And so it gives it that kind of nice creamy feel without a lot of the extra calories of fat. And so we eat it a lot. Whenever you have ice cream, you're actually eating probably quite a bit of algae. But it's used to thicken lipstick and even paint. So you run into this more often than you think. Now on to some of the harmful ones. So there's these strange algae called dinoflagellates. They're different than the other algae. You can see them on the left side there. They have these really intricate cell walls. Once in a while they'll form these red tides that look like somebody spilled orange or red paint in the ocean. You can see that obviously right over in here. And one of the interesting features of that I just can't pass up talking about is at night when they're disturbed, you can see them bioluminesce. They actually glow when the waves come by or a boat moves by or even fish swim through the water. So some really crazy organisms here. There are quite a few different fungus-like protists. These slime molds over here on the left look very slimy. They work a lot like a fungus. They just don't look much like it. Don't really see mushrooms out of them. Of course, you got water molds, same sort of function as molds, but just in water. And then You have some disease-causing ones that cause disease in plants, like powdery mildew, that can really affect crops. On the same sort of line, there are other diseases caused by protists, like blights. It's kind of in the same group as those powdery mildews and whatnot. Potato blight is a really big deal in the 1800s, especially in Ireland, when you can see this potato here, not very appealing. When it was affected by potato blight, really caused massive starvation for people that depended on it. But we have some that hit us as well. Giardia can live in waterways, and if your body is not used to fighting that off and can't recognize it, it can cause pretty severe diarrhea. And then malaria is probably one of our most serious protist diseases. Hard to get rid of because its cells are a lot like ours, and you can see it in here. These are a bunch of red blood cells, and the little more colored ones, darker staining, those are the malaria germs amongst the blood cells. This disease still, even in the 21st century, kills about 500,000 people a year. And like I said, it's difficult to treat because protists are eukaryotes, just like us.
Now, since protists are kind of a leftover group, it's hard to say much about their structure exactly. Some are one-celled, some are gigantic, made of many, many cells, larger than us. And most of them have cell walls,
but sometimes they don't. And protists can move through the watery environment they live in, usually using either cilia, flagella, or amoeboid movement. The cilia are these little tiny hairs that they use like oars to move through the water. Flagella, like you see on this euglena over here, which is a type of algae with a long whip that it thrashes back and forth and motors it through the water. And then amoeba, of course, move through these long sort of tentacles or arms that just kind of grow and ooze out in different directions.
We won't get into it in this class, but there's some really bizarre life cycles that go on with these guys, especially in seaweed. So most organisms like us have 2 sets of DNA. Same is true of the plants outside. And when they go to reproduce sexually, they cut down to 1 and produce pollen, ovules, or in our case, sperm and eggs. In seaweed, at least some of them, they can take those sex cells, they land and produce a whole new plant that looks just like the old one. I mean, that would be weird. That would be like a pine tree having that pollen drift off, it land and produce a new pine tree that only had 1 set of chromosomes, while its parent still had 2. And then that one could fertilize another one and produce another pine tree. Some really bizarre stuff going on that I'm not really going to try to give you any sort of overview other than to say it's weird and they can reproduce different ways. Surprisingly, when it comes to getting energy, protists do it all. Obviously, algae photosynthesize, but they make different pigments than regular plants do. Others eat things. They can gobble up small particles, and even others absorb them a lot like fungi do. Well, no doubt about it, protists are a weird group of organisms. They kind of help me appreciate the diversity of life out there and just the really strange ways that organisms go about just making it through life. So I hope that brings some appreciation to you as well. In terms of how they intersect our lives, there's kind of some strange and surprising ways. You know, there's the straightforward bad effects like malaria, which is a really serious disease, and a few other diseases as well, but they also have some really good effects. They form the basis of aquatic food chains so that we have fish to eat. Some of those actually sank to the bottom of the ocean and made chalk. And that's where chalk came from. A lot of this is protists. And others intersect our lives in really kind of surprising ways. You know, I know it's not lunchtime, but I think I'll enjoy some protists now.